Here. So I'm Rico. If you actually, did you start recording, Nick?
I just did, yes. I thought we'd get your intro in as well.
Okay. Um, so I don't know if I've met all of you, but I'm Rico. I suppose I'm organising this under the auspices of being the deputy postgraduate research lead. And the purpose of this really was to begin actually trying to develop a sort of set of bespoke training sessions. I'm sorry about this light on my camera, it's really annoying. Dedicated to PhD students, right? So one, it's about trying to help develop the postgraduate research culture in the school. And also, so I think it's for two things. I see it as a kind of two-way process, really. It's an opportunity for PhD students to listen to the experiences of sort of academics in the school in terms of how they practice research. So it should be about the practice of research. If you think about our school research seminars are about research findings, I'd like to see these sessions as being like, actually, how do we do research? What are the kinds of things that we actually do and sort of the process behind it? Alongside some more career orientated stuff. So I think the last session I'll do will be on submitting a journal article. So I'm the editor of a journal, so I can hopefully give you some insider type of insight to that. But at the same time, I want to encourage also my colleagues to attend supervisors, because I think it's an important opportunity to actually share experiences. So we all have done PhDs, or we all have been sort of busy undertaking research in different ways from different sort of methodological approaches. I think my hope would be to actually sort of build a community around this, where we are sharing our experiences as well as kind of offering advice and guidance. So I do hope that we can develop this as a kind of two-way discussion. Hi, Zani. And so that's the kind of the purpose behind this. We'll do 4 sessions this term. As I said, we've got Anna Tarrant coming in. Daniello is going to come, and then I'll do one. But yeah, to start us off, I mean, I'm delighted Nick is going to come and is talking to us today. And Nick's sort of going to talk about this relationship between theory. Or you're talking about the genre of the dissertation. You've got a title, so
I have yes, changed the title a little bit at the last minute. It is kind of what you mentioned. So kind of like the relationship between theory, methods, and results.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of speaking mostly from a perspective of being a theorist, which means that when I was kind of putting my dissertation together, in some ways it was a little bit of a challenge, because I didn't have any results to report really, other than the ones that were kind of in my head. So in that way, trying to kind of like structure my thoughts in a way that would be understandable and not just be, say, a long piece of prose for the examiners was a little bit of a challenge. And so basically what I'm offering here is my thinking about the way that I handled this. And I think the key message I want to sort of get across is there's actually a important connection between style and substance. This actually applies in almost any kind of product, any kind of media product that we kind of create. And it applies to the dissertation and also to your journal articles and other kind of academic research outputs as well. So kind of illustrating it here, this is like a meme that I thought was quite funny on Twitter from a few months ago, where it's just like, what's the difference between methods and methodology? Well, actually, there are a few distinctions you can make between methods and methodology. They're not exactly the same category of things. But the other thing about methodology is it sounds kind of smart. And so if you can kind of like have a section on that and you kind of and make it seem like you know what you're talking about, then that can be very reassuring for your audience. Okay, so let's get it. So just to show what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'm going to talk about why we should care about genre, especially when we're thinking about writing our dissertations. Then I'm going to talk about some generic features of a dissertation, which hopefully are mostly kind of familiar to you, but I'm hoping to recast them slightly as features of a genre rather than just something you have to do for reasons that don't necessarily meet up, don't necessarily make sense at the outset. And then in order to illustrate why they make sense, I'm going to suggest how combining these different generic features can produce some useful research design narratives. And that is the sort of thing that really helps to move a project along and eventually allows you to present something that is understandable and also compelling for your audience or for your readership. Your readership, at least initially, is going to be your examiners. Hopefully that's not going to be your only readership. It will be the research community as well. But at least initially, you're going to be dealing with, potentially a quite tough audience. The examiners who are there and are meant to criticize your work. So kind of making their decision to kind of give you minor revisions or to accept it more or less as is a useful thing to be able to do, basically. And I think that by thinking about it this way, by thinking about it in terms of genre, I think I can help you with doing that. And then I'm going to point out that you don't want to just follow any formula slavishly. There is some positive deviance that you should aim for when doing a dissertation. And I'm going to kind of outline how you might think about doing that. So I had a little pre-work that you could do, and you can still go back and have a look at them if you want. I sent them out on the list earlier. And basically it's two items. One is a clip from Charlie Brooker's Newswipe, and the other is a Stan Freberg audio clip of from a sort of stand-up routine that he used to do. What I wanted to get across with that is the idea that genre is extremely powerful. So in Charlie Brooker's case, he did a news report that was about nothing, or rather it was about doing a news report. There was no content that we would recognize as being news in that clip. Nevertheless, it is absolutely a news report. And the reason is because it follows a set formula, certain sets of presentational styles, certain clips, certain headlines and headings, and just the way the narrative moves. It is a news report. It's a news report because it has the generic features of a news report. The real St. George and the Dragon, Dragonet, is a kind of similar point. Basically, it takes a fairy tale and recasts it in a detective or in a police procedural drama. Basically, it's following Dragnet, one of the original police serials. And what it does is it sort of makes fun of those generic conventions, but in doing so, it shows quite how strong they are. And what I want to say is that this same thing applies to writing a dissertation. What you want to do is know what the generic features of a dissertation are and use them, potentially to some extent, go a little bit outside of your comfort zone in emphasizing them. Being very, very explicit about what you're doing. And what that does is it's very inviting and reassuring for your readers. They'll think that you understand what you're doing in a way that merely having the content right won't quite convince them. If everything is kind of set up in a way that kind of narrates what they're expecting to see, they're going to feel like they're smart, because they're going to be following, your hopefully complex thoughts in a way that is kind of formatted in a way that they can read it in sequence, or they can dip in and out and kind of have a good idea about what's going on in your dissertation. So what are the generic components of a dissertation? I mean, not all of these are necessary. And there are probably some more that you need, such as the conclusion, but I thought these ones would be useful to think about. So there's the famous research question. We often actually start a dissertation without really understanding what our research question is. Not all research inquiries sort of have an obvious question. Nevertheless, I highly advise you come up with one eventually and put it in the introduction. And this is simply the problem or puzzle that your project addresses. Then we have, the classic, the literature review. Now, that is designed to show engagement with other scholars, and perhaps most importantly, the gap you intend to fill. That's the, demonstrate that what you've done hasn't been done before, at least in the way that you're trying to do it. And in order to do that, you need to show that you're aware of what has come before. But we'll see that the gap is an important part of the narrative of the dissertation. So that's very important. And then we've got research design, which is often kind of mixed up a little bit with methods and methodology. But so far as I can tell, it is generally what we think of as your combination of theory, methodology, and data collection. So it's like the whole piece, the way it all kind of fits together. Some dissertations might want an explicit section on the research design. Others you might not need to. I had a little methods. I had a methodology chapter myself. Ultimately, in my theory dissertation, I didn't really have a research design chapter, but for some it might be very useful. Then we've got theory, which might be its own section, or it might be something that's kind of weaved in throughout a dissertation. If it's a theory dissertation, that's probably going to be the way that it's going to look. But what it is it's a general account that explains, occasionally maybe tries to predict, the way that social phenomena relate to each other and interact with one another. That's what theory is at its sort of most general level, at least my definition, my kind of way of thinking about it. Methodology. So methodology is essentially the study and development of research methods. So it's like taking a step back from the actual methods that you're doing as part of your, research design, like the things, your mechanisms, the routines you're going to be doing for doing data collection, and actually having a section that thinks about and reflects on who has done these methods before, and what's good about them, what's bad about them, evaluating and assessing them, and potentially coming up with a new research method. That is what methodology is. That's just the practice of methodology. You don't need that in every dissertation, but some evidence of critically reflecting on your method, that would be methodology, is potentially very useful. Then we have methods, as I say, that's the practical techniques employed for collecting data. And, if you're doing any empirical work at all in your dissertation, you really need a section on that just to say, this is what I did. This is how I went about it. And then we have, the empirical results, the product of your field work, data collection, and the analysis. So what can you produce with this sort of set of generic conventions? Here are some nice research design narratives that are quite common, and if you can kind of fit your research design or fit your dissertation to one of these, then that would be very, very compelling, but also very reassuring for your readership. So here are some classic ones. An important, perhaps an old theory, is put to the test using new data. Another one is, from new field data emerges a novel theory. A fresh and exciting method is used to reanalyze existing data. Two or more well-known methods join forces to produce a new perspective on existing data or a theory. So that's the kind of mixed methods kind of approach. That's what's exciting about mixed methods. A theory fails due to its tragic internal contradictions. That's what we would call imminent critique in political theory or political philosophy. Surprisingly popular and kind of important because it's quite powerful insofar as it can kind of show that a theory has problems even on its own terms, even sort of taken fully to its own logical conclusion. That's a kind of that's a kind of fascinating narrative. It kind of parallels tragic stories in when we're thinking about like human narratives in general. So it's kind of interesting and kind of like tickles us in some ways. And then we've also got this one: two apparently rival theories are combined to produce something stronger than either alone. So it would have that would be like a classic synthesis. Is perhaps the way that Hegel kind of conceptualized philosophy itself. That was the kind of way that things happened. They are you take rival ideas and you find some way of reconciling them and producing something novel and innovative that way. So normally, when you're doing a dissertation, you're not going to be developing some theory from scratch. That's for advanced associate professors and professors. Instead, what you're doing is you're taking some components that already exist and you're combining them in a novel way. But fortunately, you can combine things in virtually infinite combinations. So you don't actually need to have your novel idea, certainly not at first when you're doing a project. You just have to figure out a novel way of combining what's already out there in the literature. And these generic conventions can help you do that. And these are the narratives that you can kind of do to kind of put your link yourself up with the rest of the literature, and then make a reader instantly realize what novelty you're providing with your work. Okay. So what I would say is that this is some advice that I had from my own PhD, my own time on my PhD as well. That taking generic conventions is important, but it's also good to kind of push the margin a little bit, but not too much. So thinking about what the core dissertation components might be, I haven't thought about the way this fits into all the categories that I've just discussed, but let's think about the research question, the method or the research design, and then the results and the conclusion. Now, the advice I've had, and it's worked quite well for me, is that ideally one of these should be a bit weird. If two of them are weird, then the overall project might be too weird for your readers. That is, they won't quite understand what you are doing, or they may end up considering it a bit flawed. It's just too outside of the conventions that they're used to seeing. You're going to have a hard time defending it, or you could have a harder time defending it. It's a bit risky to do something that's weird along two of those three dimensions. Now, if none of them are weird, then you'll probably be fine. But the project might be a bit boring. So it might be more difficult for you to kind of proceed with it and complete it. And you may need to make a bit more of an effort to demonstrate the way in which it is novel. So it's quite possible to have a completely normal dissertation, and then you can afford to be weird later on in your research career. On my account, it's a good idea to have one dimension of weirdness and no more. And an example of this, I think this kind of fit very well because it turned out to be my most successful project and paper, Million Liberalism and Extreme Pornography. So the components of it, the research question is, should liberals ban extreme pornography? That's essentially the research question. And this is weird. No one else touches this topic. I have no idea why, but for some reason, no one else wants to talk about this topic. But it's weird. No one else deals with it. By definition, it's already kind of interesting and compelling. The method is analytical political theory with a little bit of empirical discussion. Very, very normal, very, very common in the literature that I work in using all the same kind of literature, all the same kind of people that's very, very familiar. So very normal. And the results, turns out Mill was a liberal on freedom of expression after all, and today's liberal should be as well. Also very, very normal. It was actually arguing against some slightly counterintuitive literature that said that Mill would be in favour of banning extreme pornography and whatnot. But so there was a good target out there. But the important thing was the topic was relatively underutilized. People were like, "Ooh, what is that about?" And that's the research question. But the methods and the results, very, very reassuring for the readers. They just think, "Yeah, okay." Weird topic, but makes perfect sense and fits into the literature on those methodological and results-based grounds. So that's kind of the way in which the one degree of weirdness works. But it could work on other things. You could have a very, very standard research question, a very standard method, and you come up with results that are a bit alarming or a bit anomalous with the rest of the literature. That would be very compelling because it would be like, whoa, we thought these methods were good. and we thought this research question was good, and yet here we are, we're coming up with a result that we weren't expecting. That's that would be another way of doing it. Or you could have a very standard research question and some, not too scary set of results, or results that kind of make sense in the literature, but you're applying it using a new and novel method, perhaps from a different field of study, a different discipline, or a different part of your field. That would also kind of be exciting and is an easy way of demonstrating novelty. So, either one of those can be a little bit weird, and if you're going to do that, make sure the other ones are pretty normal. That's like my way of doing it. So what's my overall message here? So basically, following most of the conventions of a dissertation is important for reassuring your readership and establishing your own membership of the research community. And this means thinking carefully about structuring your formal academic writing so that it fits within some of these categories. But you shouldn't sweat the conventions too much. Think of them as presentational devices, motifs with which you can play around. Conventions are always partly arbitrary and contingent. They change with fashions. And as a result, sometimes the best way to see what they look like now, in other words, what your readers are going to be expecting and your examiners might be expecting to see, might not necessarily be in a textbook, but you may find it by reading one or two recent dissertations or monographs in your field. Use that as your kind of template for figuring out, what these different sections look like and which of these sections is kind of necessary in the particular field where you're making your contribution. And as I said at the beginning, on my account here, maybe I'm happy to hear some pushback because it might turn out that I've misconceived this enterprise on some level. But for me, I find that style is ultimately a component of the substance. In other words, you have to pay attention to the style in order to make sure that the ideas that you're trying to get across in your dissertation are actually can be readily received by the research community, that is your readership, your audience that you're targeting. So there we are. Okay, so can I stop?